Hello and welcome. Do you love the Songs or Spells podcast? Presented by me, Karlyn King. Hearing about how rock stars use magic in their lives? Do you want to level up your life using the easy spiritual tips discussed with our amazing guests like Aurora, Idols, and OG Sex Pistol Glenn Matlock? Well, now is the time. I have personally manifested many things like relationships, tuition fees, and even specific podcast guests. Think of me as your personal guide for your spiritual glow up. So what are you waiting for? As Billie Eilish, Jay-Z, and even Ariana Grande knows, yep, they practice this. A weekly bit of witchery does not take long. So come join our Patreon community today and find your like-minded tribe. You can access it via the link in the show notes or our Instagram bio at Songs or Spells Podcasts, with weekly lessons on things like law of attraction, manifesting, working with the new and the full moon to get what you want. Come join us today. We are waiting to meet you and witness your level up. Hey, and welcome back to another episode of the Songs or Spells podcast. Now, this week I am joined by another fellow Glaswegian, the one and only Justin Currie from Amitri. Now, what is great about this story is that Justin initially said no to being on the podcast because he said, I'm not spiritual, I'm not into any of that, I don't get it. But as you will hear in this conversation, spirituality is just looking after yourself. It's well-being, it's self-care. I call it witchcraft. So you're going to hear about all the ways that Justin Currie has maintained a career in the music industry for a very long time and not lost the plot, although he did say sometimes he does. Let's dive in.
Hi, this is Justin Currie from Amitri from Glasgow, and you're listening to the fabulous Songs or Spells podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us here for season 3 of the podcast.
My pleasure. I'm intrigued to see what it's all about.
Yeah, I've been a big fan for a long time. So a really good question to kick off would be, do you think songs are spells?
Well, I'm not really sure what a spell is. I suppose the obvious thing to say is they can obviously cast a spell over the listener, and maybe that's what you want them to do. But I'm not entirely sure what the word spell means. It seems to have a lot of different. There's a lot of different ways you could use it. I mean, I don't like the idea that a song would send you into some kind of trance. I like the idea that it's a bit more persuasive than it's a kind of magic potion or something. But certainly the best songs definitely take you to a different state, a different state of mind. The best songs you can kind of get inside and walk around inside them and be in a whole different place. There's a really great quote from, I think it's Philip Glass, and he was being interviewed on Radio 3 or something, or Radio 4, and they were asking him for how he describes music when he's doing kind of, I don't know, tutorials or speeches and things. And he said, I used to, for years and years and years, the closest I could get to describing what music is I used to say that it was a language. And that seemed to do for years and years. And then I suddenly realized that was completely inadequate. And the best I can get now is music as a place. And I quite like that. And because songs for me are, the songs that really capture me are alternative worlds in a way, I think. Like Strawberry Fields Forever puts me inside a completely different space. So it is a place, it's not a language.
Wow, I love that. So you're transported to a space, a place with its own vibration?
Yeah, with its own internal logic and visual imagery, and all of that is made by the lyrics as much as the music, or the music as much as the lyrics. Yeah. So again, something like Strawberry Fields Forever, the surrealism of the music takes you to a very sort of colourful place, whereas the lyrics are actually quite acidic and there's something quite grueling about the lyrics. So the combination of those two things just puts you into a very special world, I think. So for me, that's what I want songs to do. So if that's a spell, then I'm in.
I guess it is. You're on board. Because, I mean, for me, it could mean it's been transported to a different place. but it could also be a specific intention, like a protest song as well. And I know that you're a big fan of that, and you've written many protest songs, right? So
a few.
yeah, so Nothing Ever Happens really comes to mind. Like, what was your intention with that song?
To express my disgust at the apathy of my own generation in the face of Thatcherism dismantling the working class. We all saw it going on. We were old enough to, I wasn't old enough to vote in the 79 election. We were certainly old enough by the early 80s to know what the hell was going on. And we just watched it without doing anything. And my generation especially were quite spoilt. We were spoilt by having, by growing up within a pretty comprehensive welfare state, and which we never really expected to see affected so adversely by our government. So we just kind of stared in wonderment and didn't really help anybody. And we certainly didn't write any protest songs. Not that protest songs changed anything. You know, the songs we were writing in the 80s were about dancing, and the songs that a lot of people in my generation were writing were about that. So I was, by the time I wrote that song in 1987 maybe, I was just completely disgusted with our apathy and just inability to know what we should be doing, you know. And also we're all walking around like we were superstars. We all had record deals in the 80s, you know. I mean, literally all of us. And we worked in bars, and we thought we were terribly free and cool, and we were just wankers, basically. So that's kind of where that song came from. And also visually it came from living in a flat that looked right along Great Western Road. So a lot of the images in that song just came from writing songs late at night and staying out the window, which is a high window is a very useful thing for writing songs because it takes you into a kind of reverie. Yeah.
Is that similar to your current process?
Well, no. What I do now is I don't really write at home anymore because I'm more domesticated than I used to be. Not that I was particularly feral before, but so now what I do is I just get on a car or a boat and I go somewhere very far away and just concentrate for a few weeks at a time, and I write as much as I can. Wow. So I don't write as often as I used to, but I write a lot at one time. That's the kind of habit I've got into.
So that's really interesting how you described that scene in the 80s. Are you talking about Glasgow specifically?
Yeah.
So what were some of the bands that you saw around you coming up alongside Amitri?
Well, there were lots of bands that, like us, were directly inspired by Postcard, which was a wonderful and brilliant phenomenon that made Glasgow the kind of centre of cool for a year or so, which had never been before, and you know, certainly not in the 60s or 70s. And that brought a lot of sort of music press interest onto bands like us that were just starting to take our tentative steps into making records and things like that. But it also encouraged a great many idiots who just wanted to be stars or just wanted to impress people who didn't really come from punk rock. I mean, the Postcard scene grew direct out of punk rock. So if you were a little punk like me at school, then Postcard was like the next step. But the attention that Postcard garnered, and it just encouraged a lot of wannabe stars, people that didn't have anything to say and that weren't particularly interested in the art side of it. They were just interested in fame and money, and in the guys' cases, in impressing girls. And that was really not what we came from at all. I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with that, but it wasn't what we were. We were about just self-expression, grab hold of any tool you can to express yourself. You know, even if your bass has only got one string, you can do something with it.
That is quite similar to what Glenn Matlock was saying back on season 2, and he described it just as an outlet because there was literally nowhere else to go and let this anger out. He talked about other practices like going to the football and getting in amongst that, and how that's remained an outlet for him as well. Do you have any other outlets?
I used to play a lot of football very badly, but I gave that up quite late in life. I gave that up at the beginning of the first lockdown a couple of years ago, and I really missed that I mean, not that I ever got particularly emotional playing football, but I do miss because there's a bit of artistry in football and there's a bit of self-expression. So I do miss that kind of physical thing where if you play a great pass, you just feel quite worthy or something. It's quite a weird feeling. So now I play table tennis, which I play table tennis with a pal who's much better than me, but I've never minded people being better than me. I'm not that competitive, so that's a bit of an outlet, I guess. And occasionally, although lockdown has really screwed this up for me actually, because I've lost my confidence on the hills, but I used to do quite a lot of hill walking, and that I don't know if that's an outlet so much as it's not output so much as input, in that it just gives you time to. It gives you a real sort of physical workout and time to think a lot about what's going on in your head, and it also affords you some, just some of the most beautiful sights you'll ever see in your life, getting to the top of the hill in Scotland.
Yeah, amazing. I've also heard that you're a bit of a people watcher from your front door. Is that correct? You're kind of generally out in the street?
Yeah, well, not so much on the street because I don't have a garden, so I just sit on the back lane, and when it's warm weather, and me and my girlfriend Emma have got this competition where if we say hello to people and they don't say hello back, you lose a point. So you've got to get them to say hello back as they go past. And some people are very shy, and some people are also very, very rude. But most people say hello.
I can imagine the rudeness. Do you think they know who you are? Are they aware?
No, but I mean, some people do, and they just say hello, But no, most people are walking past just think, why are these two people sitting on crappy little foldaway chairs outside a garage in a back lane? Because it's not exactly the most salubrious environment to be sitting out in. But it's semi-private because it's right outside our house. So
yeah.
I mean, we do go to the park. We're not complete savages. But there's a fridge there full of beer, and there's a toilet nearby, so it's kind of convenient. It's our garden without any plants. That's what it is.
Brilliant. And I bet you see all sorts of sights.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? When I first moved in to this area, which is really near the centre of town, I thought, this is going to be quite noisy at night because a lot of people walking back from town will use the back streets. Because I always used to use the back streets just to stay away from the police and stay away from any sort of bad people. But actually, it's really quiet. You don't see that many people. You see the odd stumbling pairs of drunks that have been in the park for too long.
Yeah.
But I've never seen a bunch of people come back from a club. They tend to stay on the main road.
Interesting. And has that inspired any lyrical content or imagery?
I don't think you can stop your environment influencing you. So certainly I'm sure the songs I've written in this house will have been influenced by what the house is like and where it is. But I couldn't really point to something specific like I could with Nothing Ever Happens, because I've got those images are really sort of etched in my head looking at that particular window because the view is so distant. You can see so much. You can see right down a very, very long street. But yeah, I'm sure things have ended up in my songs from this house.
Amazing. What is your favourite song that you've written? If you had to pick one.
That's really, really tough. I suppose there was a B-side that we did called Sleep Inside of Teardrops, which is a kind of death song, which I was really proud of at the time. We didn't quite get the record right, so it didn't make it onto the album. So we just stuck it on a B-side. And that's become quite requested over the years. It's very slow and quite, I don't know if it's maudlin, it's just very sad. But it's good sad, it's I think I got more or less everything right in that song. And there's a song on the new album which I think I get everything right on as well, which is another slow song called Second Staircase. And I sometimes you write things and there's nothing that you regret about it. There's not a chord you wish you'd added, and there's not a lyric you wish you'd kind of edited down a bit more. So I suppose, yeah, those two songs. But it depends on the day. Sometimes it's like, if it's something a bit more groovy, that'll be my favourite song.
To go back to Nothing Ever Happens, It's such a beautiful song, but the lyrics are so dark. And I love that because people could be singing it, singing away and not always registering what it's about. And I think that's really clever.
I mean, it's not deliberately clever. It's just that's sort of the way that I write. And I've always said that songs get on the radio and become hits because of the tunes and because of what they feel like. That nothing's ever a hit because of the lyric. I mean, it might be more catchy because of the line in the chorus, but lyrics don't make hits. I just think it's tunes and grooves and feels that make hits. So when I wrote that song, I had a sneaking suspicion that it might get played on the radio because it has a kind of lilt to it, which is quite. It's not happy, but it's not as kind of sad as the story in the song. So I always had a feeling it might get played in the radio, and it was incredibly grateful when it did.
Yeah. Do you still feel the way that you felt when you wrote that song? Are those emotions still there?
Yeah, sing it. I mean, there's lines that I wouldn't have written now because I think they're a bit overly flowery. And there's things that are very dated in that song, like there's a line about telephone exchanges, which must be utterly meaningless to anybody born in the last 20 or 30 years. But no, I can still sing it with the same venom or the same sadness, depending how I feel. And it's not difficult to sing, so that allows you to enjoy the sort of meaning of it. Whereas other songs, you've got no time to interpret them because you're just constantly trying to hit those notes and get all the words in time. There's nothing that happens is quite easy, and you can play around with the phrasing a wee bit to make it feel slightly different. So I do still enjoy singing if I'm slightly embarrassed by a couple of the lines in it.
Would you ever write a 2022 version of it?
Well, in a way, Nothing Ever Happens is sort of a list song. I mean, it's not the definition of a list song, but it has echoes of the list song. And I've written quite a lot of songs like that have sort of piles of lyrics that are just reiterating the same idea over and over again, which is a nice wee challenge to write. And if you get it right, it can be quite a dramatic way of expressing what you're trying to say. So there's a few things that are like that. There's a song called Nation of Caners on the new record, and there's a couple of songs on my solo records, a song called No Surrender, and there's a song called The Fight to Be Human, which I felt were directly related to Nothing Ever Happens. Yeah. They weren't so much. I mean, No Surrender is a protest song, and The Fight to Be Human's more of a midlife crisis thing or something. But they're essentially coming from the same place, which, as I was saying, is just trying to drive home the point by repetition through variety, repetition through variety. So instead of total repetition, you're saying the same thing again and again in slightly different ways.
To hammer that point home.
Just make it blindingly obvious.
Yeah. So No Surrender then? So that sounds way more like confrontational than Nothing Ever Happened. So where did that emerge from?
That just came about because we could all see the West, or we could all see America and Britain piling into the Iraq war without a UN resolution. And it was that went on for nearly a year because you just knew that Bush was going to invade Iraq, and you just knew that Blair was going to follow him. It was written before the invasion of Iraq, from just looking at what that meant, and how, listening to the justification, the sort of feeble justification that politicians were making as they were about to embark on something immoral and illegal and horrendously violent. So, that came from a similar place of frustration and fury that Nothing Ever Happens came from. Yeah. But it was it was a much longer song to write because there's a lot more in it. Or there's a lot more lyrics in it. There's not a lot of tune in it, but there's a lot more lyrics in it. We sort of came out of punk rock, and punk rock wasn't really anything to do with the Beatles as such. I mean, maybe some of the melody, but in terms of the chord sequences and the lyrics, punk was really different from the Beatles, I think. So punk was what got me to form a band, not the Beatles. Because when you're a kid and you listen to the Beatles, it's just so impossibly clever, and you need to be a really good guitarist to figure that stuff out, I mean, I used to buy the books and look at and try and learn the chord changes in the books, and then they're always kind of wrong, and then you would sit for a day and work out the chords for Yesterday or something, or something really tricky like again, Strawberry Fields Forever or I'm the Walrus. And it's just, that stuff's not easy, you know.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you Spellcast, your weekly astrology for the week ahead. And this week, moon is in my sign, Libra. We've just had a beautiful new moon, so I really hope you've set your intentions for the lunar month ahead. And Libra is trining Saturn, which is in Aquarius, so this is an excellent time to conduct business meetings, especially if you need to sell your ideas to people who hold a lot of respect and authority. Particularly women in power could help you right now. Any matters that need emotional control should be handled, as you will feel mentally strong. Now back to my chat with Justin. So who would be your main, and obviously a lot of punk stuff, any particular bands?
The Buzzcocks were a big thing, very melodic, very romantic, and very melodic guitar solos. The things that directly influenced us at the beginning were television, the first two television albums, an album with the Feelies called Crazy Rhythms, their first album, and a bit of Early Fall and Captain Beefheart. They were the things that we sort of worshipped in terms of what the guitars were doing. We never really sounded like any of those bands, but music journalists could always spot that we'd been listening to them. So they must have had a big influence. And as I say, Orange Juice and Joseph K, and to a certain extent Aztec Camera, but certainly Joseph K were a really big influence on us. We sort of tried to, we really tried to sound like them.
I saw the Buzzcocks perform for the first time in my life at a festival down the rabbit hole up in Stirlingshire.
Yeah.
They were incredible. Like, they were the highlight of that festival.
Yeah,
they
that's
were
great.
So good. I know exactly what you mean about their kind of pop sensibility, but delivery and the tone, and just that they kind of made it's almost like when you're watching them, you're like, I could do this. Anyone could do this. Yeah, is that what you got from punk?
Yeah, and if you listen to Steve Diggle's guitar solos, you can sing along to them. You know, they're like tunes. They're like choruses. I remember seeing them at the Apollo, and everybody was singing along to the guitar solos, and people just started bursting out laughing because there was something really funny about everybody going, nee, 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 nee. You know, you can't really do that with heavy metal or serious rock music, but you can do it with the Buzzcocks, and there's something really funny about it.
They're just so accessible, but again, like you say, they've got something to say as well. They've got a message. In terms of music, you know, now 2022, are there any artists that you really rate today?
What was I listening to at the weekend? I was kind of obsessing over a Fontaine's DC song called Dublin City Sky, which I really like. Yeah. Trying to figure out why the lyric's so good and trying to figure out what the lyric is really about. And oh God, what else? I'm terrible with this now. I've been reading. I've read a couple of books recently about music. I don't read a lot of music books. I read a book called Dilla Time, which is about the beat maker and rapper Jay Dilla from Detroit, whom my girlfriend actually took me to see years ago. I've always really loved his music. So I bought this biography when I was in America. There was a really brilliant bookshop in Atlanta which had a copy of this biography. And that got me really thinking about his grooves. And I did, again, reading that book, I didn't realise that he was partly responsible for a lot of the feels of the grooves on the second D'Angelo record, which is Voodoo, I think. So I've been listening to quite a lot of that again. And I've also been reading a book by Bob Stanley I think he's from St. Etienne, who wrote a book called Yeah, 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 about pop music, which got rave reviews, which I've not read, but his second book is about the history of pop music from the sort of middle of the 19th century through to the 60s. A lot of these things that you've just never heard of that were mainstream pop music in their day. So I've been checking a lot of that stuff on streaming services, and that's really interesting. So I've discovered a couple of really brilliant things. A couple of songs by Irving Berlin, which I'd never heard before, which are really beautiful. Don't ask me to name them.
Great. I mean, what are your thoughts on streaming as an artist and consumer?
Well, as a musician, it's incredibly convenient. I completely understand why the music industry itself has fallen in love with streaming because people effectively buy the same record over and over and over again every time they listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
The real downside of streaming is nobody can inherit your record collection, which I think is very sad. So I subscribe to 2 streaming services, one which has got a really high bit rate, one that uses really large file sizes, and I can't really afford to have the 2 of them anymore because they've become so expensive.
Yeah.
So what did seem really cheap and convenient is becoming less. And obviously from the artist side, unless you own your own recordings, the money that you accrue from it is pretty small. If you own your own recordings, you can make a living out of streaming if you know what you're doing. But if you sell your recording rights to a record company, which for a lot of people is a necessity early in their careers, or early in life, it's really hard to make money out of streaming.
Do you own your own rights?
Well, the rights to my solo albums have all reverted back to me, and the last solo album I put out, my manager did all the admin for me, and we owned the rights, and we actually saw checks from streaming services that were, I mean, they weren't a huge amount of money, but they were money that could keep you in wages for a few months,
Yeah.
And that was on a really low amount of streams with no PR or anything. I mean, the devil's bargain that young bands have got to make is if they want to reach a wider audience, they're going to have to sell some of the rights to companies that have got money that can back them, because you don't have hits without money. It's a vanishing rarity for a record just to break through on YouTube or on Spotify. You need backing. You need backing to get you on tour. You need backing to make videos. It's hard to hold on to your rights and expand your audience.
It's great that you mentioned Fontaines and how they've kind of managed to break through on some level, a kind of independent level. Are there any other Scottish acts that you're really into at the moment?
Off the top of my head, no. I mean, I'm a big fan of Paolo Nutini's, but that's not really a sort of up-and-coming Scottish act. I really love his voice. And I've got kind of a soft spot for Lewis Capaldi because even though he's got a very mannered way of singing, he does sound like he believes what he's singing, which is not common. I'm very fussy about singers. I've got to really believe them, even if they can sing like fuck. If I don't believe what they're saying, I'm not interested at all. You
mentioned, because you've been in the industry for quite a long time, and you mentioned different outlets that you'd had, especially before lockdown. But in terms of your well-being, so some guests have come on and talked about, they've said things like they meditate. Have you ever done anything like that?
I've got a real problem with things that involve relaxation. I'm not a very relaxed person, so I can't do massages because I just get really ticklish, and I can't really concentrate for any length of time without stimulus. I mean, for example, when I go away on my own to write, if I wasn't writing, I would go a bit mad because I lock myself away somewhere with there's just no outside influences or media. And I couldn't really cope with that unless I had something to do. And the idea, even of meditating for 20 minutes, sort of fills me with absolute dread. I just kind of think it's not for me. Everybody has an internal monologue, and I like to peek into that internal monologue and turn it into songs. I don't really want to hear it all the time, so I tend to block it out with books and TV and films. So meditation fills me with horror for that reason.
Wow. So how would you say that you look after your well-being then?
Well, I mean, I don't particularly look after my well-being other than the obvious things. I try not to be completely sedentary. I try to have a healthy sort of diet for certain periods, so that doesn't always work. I mean, that's a good question. Hill walking used to be a big thing in terms of that. I remember coming off the road in 1990, having had a tumultuously busy year because we had our first hit in January that year, and we got really sucked into touring America for months and months and months, and that was starting to take its toll just sort of psychologically, I think, on all of us. And I remember coming home from one of those 3-month-long tours and just literally running up a hill on a lovely June evening. So that used to be a pretty surefire fix if I was feeling under the cosh a bit in terms of pressure. I've not been busy like that for years. You know, I'm not really under an awful lot of pressure. I mean, I'm extremely lucky in that sense. I don't have a record company breathing down my neck saying you've got to write a hit. I would find that intolerably difficult. I always did, to be honest. And we didn't have much of that in our time. We were quite lucky. So, yeah, just a walk in the park and I just stroke the cat for half an hour.
So there is research that the purring of a cat is really good and can lower your blood pressure in the same way that meditation does.
I've heard that. I've heard that even if you even look at a cat or if you look at some fish swimming out in a tank, that your blood pressure drops a bit. I certainly, I do find cats very comforting. Sometimes they strike the most ridiculous poses and you just stare at them for a couple of minutes going, that's so bizarre. So yeah, I think the cat does me a bit of good.
That's great. I think you're more spiritual than you know.
See, I wouldn't describe that as spiritual. I would just describe it as, my dad had cats and my mum had cats as well. So that there's you just sort of learn that these things they're not just fun things to have. There's something about them that's probably quite good for your as you're saying, well-being. I don't know if that's that's the right sort of term for me, but certainly things that just keep you on an even keel. I mean, just feeding a cat, you know, and it's like people talk about walking their dogs. I'm sure that's extremely good for you, but I would have a dog, except I refuse to pick up somebody's shit. I'm just not doing it. It's not on.
I know. Yeah, cats are enough work, definitely.
Well, that's the great thing about cats. They're not really any work, so you just have to be the minimum attention, feed them and water them, and pet them, and then just follow their orders.
Basically, yeah. I have quite a demanding one. Likes to put his paw in my dinner, so yeah.
Yeah, I have that. And no, you can't really discipline a cat. You just have to pick it up, and put it out of the room.
You've got a blog site, it's justincurrie.com, and it's very interesting because it seems to be a sort of mix of like blog, social commentary, diary, journals. Is that right? Yeah,
I mean, it's mainly just description of what I'm seeing out the window of the van on the whole, and what I'm doing during the day. So it's a great way to kill time when you're not doing very much, because you can just describe what you see around you, which is not terribly interesting, but it kills time really effectively, and it, you know, some of the fans really like it because it kind of puts them in the picture. But it's diary-esque, but I wouldn't really want to write a diary in that. I wouldn't want to expose my private life to an audience in that way. If I was going to write something, I would much rather write something fictional, which I'm incapable of doing. So the blogs are really just a description of the working day when we're touring, and just and flights of fancy, and then, you know, just overwriting everything just to pretend you're a poet, which is very bad writing indeed.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because I've not really seen anything like it for quite a while. It's super detailed. It sounds like your mind is constantly on. You're constantly observing.
Well, I think everybody is. It's just if you set yourself a little project of writing down what you see and figuring out how to describe it, then you realise that this stuff's going on all the time. You're just I wonder what that woman does. I wonder what he ate for breakfast, or whatever it is, you know. So the great thing about that is you find yourself sitting in city squares, just watching people play or watching drunk people in a park. You would naturally just have thoughts about that. So I mean, that's why I say it's not really creative writing. It's just description, and it's very. I mean, that's pretty good for you actually when you're on the road, because you're not because it kills time so efficiently. You don't get frustrated waiting for things. You just write a lot of rubbish into your phone, you know. Yeah.
And you're going back out on the road soon, is that right? You're going out to Europe?
Yeah, we're touring in September. We've kind of been on the road on and off since last autumn. I mean, with some quite long breaks, but it all feels like part of the same thing. You know, we're playing similar sets in most of these gigs. So we're doing festival-y, outdoorsy things over the summer, and then September, Europe, and then hopefully February we'll go to Australia, which I'm really excited about.
Brilliant. Is there anywhere you've not played yet?
Yeah, never been to Japan, much to my annoyance.
Wow.
Never been to the Far East. Lots of places I would love to go to that rock bands don't tour, but I've never been to India. I'd love to go to India, and I apart from Egypt, I've never been to Africa, and I would love to see parts of Africa.
Yeah.
And never been to South America, which is,
Wow.
most sort of rock bands will find themselves doing something in Brazil or maybe Argentina, but that's just our big areas for touring were Scandinavia, Germany, and Britain, and Australia, and America, and that was it. There was nowhere else had any interest in Amitri. We weren't on the radio, we weren't on the MTV equivalents. So we were lucky to have those areas because it kept the variety going and it kept us busy. But yeah, I'd love to have gone to Japan, or I'd love to spend more time in Italy and Spain and Portugal for obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. You've chosen to stay in your hometown of Glasgow as your permanent residence. And I love that, because a lot of artists do move to London or LA or these kind of typical music cities.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you chose to stay in Glasgow?
Maybe I'm a bit of a coward. I did toy with moving to New York for a while, quite seriously. And I really wish I had, actually. I wish I'd spent a few years somewhere else. I had a share of a house in London for quite a while. So I spent a lot of time in London in the mid-90s. But I always had a base here, and I would always, if I got bored or if I got fed up with London, I would always come back here. The great advantage of coming into the mainstream when we did, you didn't have to move to London like you really had to in the 70s and early 80s. It's almost as if the music business insisted that you would move.
Yeah.
But because of the advent of these fantastic indie labels like Postcard and Fast Products, the centre of influence moved north. Again, because of the labels from like Kitchenware in Newcastle and Factory in Manchester, bands coming out of Sheffield. That whole indie thing really decentralised what you might call the music industry, certainly the recording industry. So you didn't have to go to London to record to find a great studio. There were good studios in Scotland and the north of England. Yeah. Or in some cases to find a good producer, and that just wasn't the case in the 70s. If you wanted to make a decent sounding record, you had to go to London. Well, we were lucky that infrastructure was falling into place as we left school and started doing our first gigs and put our first single out. So all of a sudden there were 2, 3 or 4 high quality studios to choose from. Yeah. And there were rehearsal rooms that you could use, because prior to that you just had to, finding rehearsal space was really difficult. If you didn't have a mate that had a garage or whose parents had a garage, which we didn't, you would find yourself, we rehearsed in a Lollipop Man's cupboard for a year. By the time we got to putting our first album out in '85, the infrastructure had kind of fallen into place. So that was extremely, extremely useful. And that in itself brought in a lot of younger bands than us. It gave them a platform to start. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing so much and being so candid about your journey and your thoughts on all of this. And my pleasure. So interesting to delve into your song process and how you set an intention with that song, and you've kept it together. I wouldn't go that far. I don't always keep it together. We'll keep that as a part 2.
It was so great to hear Justin's songwriting process, and he is the embodiment of songs or spells in that he talked about the feeling of the song, and that is completely what we do with manifesting and the law of attraction. So he's probably more spiritual than he thinks. It was so interesting how he struggled with anything meditative or relaxing, because he's always on and he's just got so much output to give, but that's what makes him such a brilliant artist and such a colourful writer. The way he talked about physical stuff like going up a mountain or football as an outlet is fantastic, and I love that he described football and how it can be almost like an art and also a massive and important outlet for lots of people. And of course, the comments about the cat are duly noted, and let's all go and adopt a cat right now. This podcast has been hosted and produced by me, Karlyn King. Check out our Instagram at Songs or Spells Podcast, our TikTok at Songs or Spells, and look out for Tarot Friday every Friday on the socials. And if you want to delve in more, come and learn some spiritual life hacks on our Patreon community. The link is in the show notes or on our Instagram or TikTok bio. And I will see you next week.